Starfield is getting a major update in the coming weeks, and in fact, I believe it's actually technically already available right now if you're willing to load up a beta version of the game, like on Steam, or I don't know if Xbox Game Pass does that, but either way, this seems like it's going to be a really, really significant update with a lot of changes to the game. And I think that given how much I have talked about Starfield in the past, and I personally think rightfully criticized the work that they put out, I think it's only fair that I go in and I kind of do a pseudo reaction to this update to see just what they're changing and to see if it really can help turn the game around and address a lot of the complaints that people like me have been saying since the game came out. So without much further ado, let's just go ahead and see what they ended up changing. So right off the bat, the first thing that they talk about is that they're finally updating the local map so that it's actually, usable. Like it actually has data and shows you an actual overhead bird's eye view of the area that you're currently in. And they're also adding a lot more markers and stuff that you can enable in order to find shops and whatnot. And I mean, you know what? This is legitimately a really positive change. I think that a lot of the things in this update are obviously very good, positive changes to the game. Though I will personally admit that this is kind of one of the more minor complaints. I feel like the issue with the local maps is less about the fact that they're barren and don't give you any useful information, and more the grander underlying problem is that there just wasn't much on the actual maps themselves worth displaying. Like, sure, when you're in a city, that's one thing, and there definitely should have always been local maps for the cities, and having the icons to know where all the shops are, definitely an improvement that helps with navigation and whatnot. But, like I said, the core root of the problem is the fact that when you're out exploring a random planet, there's just not much there. Everything's way too spread out, and the points of interest are just not even worth exploring most of the time. So I almost understand why at least those local maps didn't have any relevant data on them, because all it does is highlight how empty these planets are when you look at it from a bird's eye view. So, like, yes, it's an update that is appreciated, but I really don't feel like it makes that much of an improvement to the game at the end of the day, because there's so many other underlying problems that are really the cause of the issue in the first place. Moving on though, the next thing they show off is a huge amount of new gameplay options that really let you actually properly customize a lot of things about the game. Things like how much food and sleep heals you, how much you need to worry about sustenance, affliction treatment, enemy damage, player damage. They separate out ground combat and ship combat so that you can make ship combat, which is just boring and uninteresting, just make that super easy, and then you can make the ground combat harder. Like, this is all, like, more options, I think, is almost always going to be better for the player. Like, now you can tailor your experience to how you want. Now, one thing, though, that I'm not a huge fan of is that the way you change these options seems to change how your experience progression works. I actually misunderstood this the first time I watched through this video, and I thought that what you could do is manually change the experience progression so that you could be like, oh, quests get 10 times more experience and enemies get like half as much experience or things like that. But no, it's that depending on what difficulty options you choose, that changes the experience progression in the game. So, like, in the example that they show you, you can see them, like, greatly increasing the player's carry capacity, but in exchange, that results in a penalty for how much experience you get. And I'm really not a fan of that, because it punishes the player for wanting to adjust the games like difficulty and options to their liking. Like, I'm willing to bet the first thing that's going to get modded out as soon as this update goes live is the experience changes, because people don't want to be punished for increasing the carrying capacity because they think the carry capacity is too low. They just want more carry capacity. Like, I think that that should be its own option as to whether or not the experience has changed when you change these kinds of options, and having the option to change the experience progression itself could be a great option to add, because that is another really big problem that the original game had, which is that the experience progression is just all over the place. Like, you would get quests that give you like 20 experience, but then you kill two random enemies on some backwater planet and you get like 200 experience, and it's like, what? Like, that makes no sense at all. So having the experience tied to this, I just feel like is a bad move, even if in general having all of these options and customizations and everything is definitely a positive change. I just like I really don't think they should have tied it to experience. I think that's a bad idea. And just kind of as a side note, they did say that they're adding the extreme difficulty as an even higher difficulty option over the current maximum difficulty. And I mean, I guess for players that want that, that's nice, but in my opinion, the problem with the game's combat is never been about the difficulty settings. It's been about the lack of variety in the weapons and options that you have to actually use in combat. Because, like, for example, all the melee weapons are functionally identical, with just like slightly different attack speeds, from what I remember. So it's like, it just, melee combat's just inherently uninteresting because there's almost no variety to it. And a lot of the guns feel very similar as well. And so as a result, combat just feels very samey and rudimentary. And like, making the enemies have more health to take more bullets isn't really an improvement to that combat. Combat difficulty should come from the nuance of options and having to make more complex strategies, in my opinion, not just making the enemies bigger bullet sponges. Now, the next thing they show off, though, this is probably the best and biggest thing that they've added in this update, which is the ability to finally customize the interior of your ship. This is such a huge missed opportunity in the base game that, honestly, it is shocking that this wasn't available at launch. Like, this is something that I think almost everybody has been saying since day one. Like, you have the outpost building system, which lets you customize interiors, and you have the starship building system. Why can't we use the outpost building to customize the interior of our starships? Especially when you have such weird issues like how you cannot actually control the layout of your ship's rooms, like the way that they're connected. Because like, if you have two large rooms next to each other, you don't actually control which of the possible doors gets made available. And they didn't show that off explicitly in this update, but hopefully this update addresses that, and that way you can actually, have some control over the interior of your ship and really make it actually feel like a home instead of just this normal, very sterile, quote-unquote NASA punk aesthetic that is kind of thrust upon you against your will. The biggest thing I wanted to do in Starfield from day one is make my own custom spaceship and have it really feel like a home, and the lack of the ability to customize the interior was really one of the biggest things holding that back. So, like I said, like this is probably my number one improvement just from this update. But I'll get into this more a little bit at the end after we go over some of the other stuff. Now, the next thing is, I think, the second biggest update, which is that they're finally making New Game Plus have a point. So, again, for anybody who wasn't aware, the way New Game Plus worked is you just kind of reset everything. You lost everything. You got a new spaceship, but you lost all of your old spaceships. But you were still locked in to the character that you built on your first playthrough. So, like, all of your background traits, everything was all completely locked in and unchangeable, which was always, again, such a huge missed opportunity, because if you're going to an entire new universe, also spoilers, I guess, but if you're going to an entire new universe, why is every other version of you always have the exact same traits? Like, if you're wanted in Universe A, why are you still wanted in Universe B? So yeah, finally being able to customize what traits you have, which can easily be justified as you just going to a different universe where your character has a different backstory, then like that makes total sense. And finally New Game Plus has a point, because that was always another big complaint, which is that, like, why would I play New Game Plus when I'm locked into the exact same character archetype that I played the first time around, when I could just start an actual proper new game and actually be able to go like, oh, this time I'll have a House Veyron backstory and a family, and then that will actually change things on subsequent playthroughs, as opposed to actually playing through on the New Game Plus mode. So now they finally actually made New Game Plus have a point. It's not a huge point. There's still not tons of different things to do in New Game Plus, to be fair, but at the very least, being able to customize your backstory and change your appearance for that matter really is, like I said, the bare minimum that should have been available at the start for New Game Plus. But yeah, after that, they talk about some performance stuff, and I don't really have much to say about that, although I do think it is really funny that they just released, like, a performance mode update for Fallout 4, and it was completely broken and botched on release, so the fact that they're releasing a performance update for consoles on Starfield right after that is just kind of really funny timing. But other than that, there are some minor quality of life things, and one of the ones that stands out to me is the option to turn off the really weird, awkward, like Oblivion style dialogue camera. And like, just from the footage they show in this trailer alone, the dialogue looks so much better, in my opinion, than that weird forced camera that they went with. Like, I don't know why they thought that was a good idea. I always thought it looked so bad, having to like zoom in on people's faces as they stare into your soul. Like, that's not how people talk. You don't stand 1 foot in front of somebody's face while yelling at them. Like, what is going on here? So like having the camera able to stay third person and zoomed out a little bit, I think makes the dialogue look a million times more natural, and it also makes it way less jarring to enter a conversation so that you're not just forced into that perspective all of a sudden. Like, again, minor things, but another thing that I feel should have been in the game at launch, because, like, I don't know who thought that dialogue camera was a good idea. Like, does anybody really like that beyond just, I guess, like, Oblivion nostalgia? It's just such a weird thing, and I do not understand it. And then finally, at the end, they do tease some stuff for future updates as well as the DLC, and they talk about how they're going to finally add a land vehicle, which is, again, that's something that I feel like a lot of people deduced was probably always planned, but must have gotten cut before launch, because, like, there's a number of the landing bays for spaceships that very clearly have ramps and a lot of space that could have easily fit some kind of rover style vehicle or something that it seems like must have gotten cut before launch, but then they didn't obviously have time to change all of the landing bays. So I feel like this is something that was probably just always been working on the in the background. And I mean, hey, it's an improvement, I'm not gonna lie, but again, I feel like you could just not space out all the points of interest so ridiculously far apart. It's kind of a solution to a problem that they themselves created, you know? Like, why are all the points of interest just spread out literal kilometers apart from each other on these planets, when you could just place them right next to where you land, or just let the player fly their spaceship closer to the point instead of having to, deploy this land vehicle and then drive over there. It doesn't really add to the gameplay, in my opinion. It just, like I said, it solves a problem that they themselves created. So they could have just avoided the problem in the first place. Though, the other thing that they mentioned that I think is really interesting is they mention quests and the Shattered Space DLC. So that's kind of a weird way of phrasing that, because I would have thought that the only quests that would get added would be in the DLC, which, to be fair, I don't really have much of an intention of playing. But the way that they phrase that makes it seem like they're trying to add new quests just as an update before the DLC comes out. And I guess, like, that I'm kind of curious about to see what they do, because, like I said earlier, one of the problems with the game is that the factions, I feel, are very underbaked and have very, very short quest lines. So, like, maybe they're planning on trying to expand on that as well, which, that could be a massive improvement to the game, not gonna lie. It just seems so weird to toss that out so nonchalantly. But it's also possible that he might have just been referring to the quests that are going to be in the Shattered Space DLC, so maybe that's just what he meant. But yeah, I think that's basically the end, though, of what they talk about. Okay, so then what are my thoughts overall on this update, and do I think that this will really turn around the game? Well, you've probably already gotten the vibe from my responses and reactions to this that I don't think that this is going to magically turn Starfield from a bad game to a good game for people like me. I think that if you're already turned off of Starfield for any number of reasons, the things in this update aren't going to magically change your mind, and things are, there's too many fundamental problems with the game that I don't think any kind of update like this could possibly address. The writing isn't going to magically get better, the space exploration is still primarily menu based, and this is kind of what I was talking about earlier, is like, yes, they finally you can customize the interior of your spaceships and make your spaceship really feel like a proper home. But I have two big questions with that kind of ruin that as a concept. One, when I change something on my spaceship, like if say for example I want to upgrade my ship's engines, the way it works right now is any random item you have scattered around your ship gets sent into storage. So what happens now if I do that with this new outpost thing? Am I going to have to redecorate my ship every single time that I want to change the engines or do anything that doesn't even touch a hab? I really, really hope not. And if anybody's willing to re-download the game's 100 GB file and test that out, by all means, let me know down in the comments below. I personally have already uninstalled the game, and I don't really feel like reinstalling it just to check that. But that seems like a huge issue if they didn't fix that. But then the other problem is that the main issue I had with the spaceships is that I was never really incentivized to be present in my spaceship for more than like a minute at a time. Like, ultimately, no matter how much you can customize your spaceship, like, adding all of this customization is great, don't get me wrong, but most of my time in space is spent navigating menus, and that's really the core of the problem, is that I'm not actually flying around in my ship. I'm go to my ship and I teleport to my cockpit, and then from my cockpit I just open up a menu, and then I teleport to a planet through a cutscene, and then I get out of my ship. I don't really spend any time in space in my ship to actually appreciate all of these customizations. So, like, and that's kind of what I mean with a lot of these other issues. It's like, yes, adding vehicles definitely will improve Starfield by making it so that I don't have to spend like 20 minutes trying to walk to a single point of interest, just repeatedly boosting over and over and everything. But that doesn't solve the core underlying problem that the point of interests are just way too far apart on a planet, and they're just not that interesting to explore in the first place, and the planets don't really have much of a point to explore them either. So, like, it's a band-aid over a gaping wound of an issue. Yes, I think almost all of these things are massive improvements to the game, but I don't think that you can really fix the underlying problems that Starfield has with these kinds of updates. Maybe the DLC will introduce some really good quality writing in the same vein as how the Far Harbor DLC in Fallout 4 was written a million times better than anything in the base game. But again, is it really that good of a thing to force people to buy your entire full-price AAA game just to then also buy a DLC on top of that just to get a single satisfying story beat out of it? I really don't think that's worthwhile. But yeah, at the end of the day, I am curious what you guys have to say. Like, do you think that this update is really going to change your mind and make you turn around on Starfield if you didn't like it? And I also am curious of the people that really do like Starfield. Like, what does this update really mean to you? Because I do acknowledge that this update has a lot of really good things. So either way, feel free to let me know your thoughts down in the comments down below. And if you like this video, make sure to leave me a like, and if you want to see me make more videos like this in the future, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so that you can get notified of when those videos come out. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you guys in the next one.